Good morning, good evening, Dumelang Basotho ba heso. Ke a le dumedisa tsatsing la kajeno. And greetings to all non-Basotho nations in our audience. My name is Mpho and I'm your host. Welcome to another exciting and insightful episode of Lesotho's Investment Case podcast. I have with me today a very important and extra special guest, Mpho Vumbukani. Mpho is the Chief Executive Officer of LNIG Holland. Mpho, welcome to our show, and thank you for agreeing to meet with us and speak to us. We look forward to an insightful and engaging conversation.
Thanks very much, Mpho. Let me also greet your viewers, and I look forward to sharing some insights in terms of the journey that one has traveled.
Amazing. Mpho, if you just quickly look up the public LinkedIn profile of Mpho, it shows that sometime way back you went to the National University of Lesotho and you studied BCom accounting. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right.
I'm more interested in the why. Why did we make that choice of program? Why was it not engineering? Why was it not arts? Why was it not music? And I'm trying to link that with what I see now in terms of your career trajectory and how it unfolded. So I want to link it back to your days at varsity.
Yeah. A very good point to start. But let me first of all start with earlier than the National University of Lesotho. In my high school days, I was fortunate to attend my high school at Masnod High School. It's a church school with a lot of values that they instill in people for their growth. So that helped me. I would realize later in life to be grounded when I have to deal with difficult issues. But from there, I think I engaged with some of my brothers and sisters who had been there before to actually try to appreciate what could work. And I'll be honest with you. At that time, when I did become accounting at the National University of Lesotho, it wasn't necessarily the perfect choice, but it is a choice that would later drive me into the right direction. As post my graduating from NAL, I realized that I wouldn't necessarily be good in pursuing the career in accounting, but understood that finance was my way and governance was the way to go. Yeah.
Why was that? Why?
So that became very interesting in that later on, when I moved on to the world of work, and I must indicate that I started with BEDCO, Basotho Enterprise Development Corporation. We're working with SMEs, guiding them with their development of business plans, business counseling. I realized that I had interest in business-related issues than necessarily in doing the debit and credit, which is what you do in the world of accounting. And with experience that I'd gathered over the 2 years that I had worked at BEDCO, I needed exposure now dealing with large corporates. And that's when I moved to LNDC as a project officer, and I got introduced to now work with large corporates, the world of now corporate governance, and a lot of other issues that began to shape my interest in how institutions are run and the importance of getting the fundamentals right around corporate governance for institutions to be sustainable. And as you know, the mandate of LNDC It's about investment attraction, and we worked with both existing companies and also the ones that had interest, that we invited them to the country. So it was a very good exposure for me in terms of actually understanding what makes organizations successful.
Fascinating. And that brings some perspective and fills up the gap where I think we are missing when we're doing our research. The primary reason why we thought it was worthwhile to chat to you on our show like this is because you have more than well over 2 decades of practical and work experience in the financial services industry broadly, but more specifically the banking and of course the insurance now. So what you have just highlighted now, that speaks to your time between when you joined the financial services. Maybe let's start there and just touch on, because this show is about a positive economic story, business-related issues. Let's speak about the role that developmental organizations and institutions such as LNIG, such as BEDCO, do they have a role in developing the economy in country, specifically in our context? What role does such organizations play? And do you think they are doing that effectively? What can they do differently?
Yeah. They play a very critical role in the development of our countries, particularly development finance institutions now for developing countries are very, very, very critical. You find that in most developing countries, you don't usually have a well-established private sector, and that's the role that they play in working towards the development of a vibrant private sector and closing the gaps that are there between what government does directly from a policy context with now what is required in the world of business. To your question, are they doing enough? They can do more. And the times I was working for both institutions, they were actually doing more, and we were fortunate at that time that there was still a lot of support from the global world in terms of what needed to be done, and the support that was due to those institutions, which would later dry post-apartheid. So one begins to understand the context of as dynamics change, why certain things need to change. So my view is they can do more, and we should. I strongly believe in institutions, and the strength of institutions emanates from providing very good role clarity to say what's the role of government, and allow government to do its role, and allow these institutions to do their role. I think in the recent past, there have been challenges in terms of role clarity with, in some instances, government coming into the space that should actually be done by either institutions like the BEDCOs, the LNDCs, or private sector institutions themselves. So that has been my observation in the recent past, and I think that needs to be corrected so that we allow these institutions to be as effective as they should be, and we allow government authorities to do their role in policy making and providing a political direction, but in the economic front, and not to be involved, because when you mix the two, you find that at times it doesn't end with very good results. Yeah, so that would be what I would recommend for us to actually strengthen or build on the strength of what we had in the past.
I agree that totally, because we can try to measure the effectiveness in the role they play and measure the vibrancy of the private sector. And you see that the economic composition, our economic composition is still largely dominated by the public sector. So they institutions like that have their work cut out.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
And the Mpho, let's now move on to. I want us to focus, and for the rest of this discussion, to focus on your. And this is what I want our audience to get or tap from this conversation. I want you to share with us the insights and the wisdom that you have gained throughout your career in financial services. Now let's start with, maybe let's start broadly with defining the role of financial services industry in the economic context, because an average Lesotho sees or defines a bank as an institution that takes their deposit and then lends them money. But I think that's a mechanical definition of what banking is. I want us our audience to appreciate the functions of banking as a system and how it's required in the product development of any country. I mean, people say for any modern economy, the banking sector is its soul and blood. I want our audience to appreciate the function of banking sector and obviously touch on the insurance sector as well.
Okay. So, Director, let me request to frame my response this way. Talk to the financial sector in terms of its broad architecture. It requires various players, and some would be banks. And banks fundamentally are deposit-taking institutions, and they take the deposits from the public. They facilitate transacting that the public needs for whatever they want to do in the economic space. And they also provide credit, extend credit, lending to the businesses and to the public. So in the main, that's the role that banks play. And it's a very critical role because it oils the engine in terms of the economic drive. We have spoken about the public sector, how it has been very much influential in our economy. We also now in this financial architecture that I want to talk to find that in our environment in Lesotho, banks have been the most dominant player in the financial sector, to a point that people ended up thinking that all solutions should be coming from banks, while necessarily that should not be the case. Now, we now would have on the risk management space, insurance players. And insurance players are split into what we call short-term insurance, which would be the insurance that we do for our assets, our cars, our houses, our house contents, to say in case we had floods or any other problem that people are duly insured and they can be brought to where they were. And that's the role of insurance. We also have the long-term life assurance space where we provide solutions for life or funeral or any long-term related aspects, like in the investment space. But also they're very passionate about educating their kids, and those would be one of the key goals that you find in the savings and investment space, that insurances provide, that people are heavily invested there. So that's what you get in the insurance space from a risk management context, and they play a very critical role. We also have now in the retirement benefit space, pension funds, who in developed countries have played a very critical role in actually developing those countries. In our case, it is only now that it is more of an emerging industry, with its regulation just having started with the new act, the Pension Fund Administration Act of 2019, and it is only now that it is taking shape. Why I want to emphasize the key role that pension funds play is, if you look at our neighbor, for instance, you go to any city, you will see the big properties there built by the pension fund administrators or the life assurance companies, the old mutuals of this world, and you name it. And that's the trajectory that as a country we've just started with just a few malls that have just been developed here. And that's part of what I would argue as a country for capital that's long term. And it's actually the focus where we should be looking at, so that we complement the work that has already been done in the banking space in terms of providing short-term lending or short-term financing for businesses or projects that would run. And when we pull all this together, it is going to help a great deal. Lastly, on the financial sector architecture, there's a critical role that fintechs play or microfinance institutions in bringing in the banking world, we call them the unbanked, but generally in the financial sector, you can say they're underserved. To say what creative means are put there to enable them to be included into the financial system. So why that becomes important is there's in the economy the formal sector and the informal sector, and you tend to find that the informal sector players have historically not been included into the system, and that undermines their growth. In countries that have actually embraced, like the SMEs, Germany would be the case in point. They're actually very key in that, and you actually see the economic growth actually being driven by that sector. And that's what, as a country, we need to apply our minds on to say, let's not only look at the formal sector in isolation, let's also apply our mind in terms of the creative solutions that can be extended to the informal sector and the small and medium enterprises.
Interesting. So you've just laid out this financial services architecture quite nicely. But I'm just wondering, as you outline the specific roles of each key role player there, my mind is just wondering if labeling and categorizing those roles, is it not does that not restrict the nimbleness and the dynamism of this whole players, so that we have the disruptions we're seeing now, the fintechs coming into the space, the telcos playing a huge role into what traditionally would be the banking territory. Is there an argument that these roles in the broader infrastructure and architecture should have the element of dynamism and evolving with time, so that you won't get stuck with saying, okay, my role is to take deposit and create a provision.
So you're raising a very good point. And my unpacking them broadly was just to indicate why we have them as such, and why you will find that they are regulated differently in some aspects. But the point you're raising is a very important one, and it talks to convergence. To say, you may, as a bank, be providing transacting services that you used to do. Let's start with banking. It makes life easy. People used to know banking by going to a branch. And they got used to that. Later on, they were introduced to the world of ATMs. But later on, the mobile network operators, the fintechs came in with solutions that provided easier way of providing those services, to a point that the bank now has moved from a branch to a mobile phone. So the convergence between the technology that you get from the mobile network operators or fintechs, that now it's leveraged on the solutions that the bank ordinarily would want to provide, now enable the inclusion that I was earlier talking about. So it is important to, first of all, understand these respective roles that they play, without necessarily saying they play that exclusively, but embracing now these new players that are coming with the innovations that are needed. And the convergence is where now it comes into play. Mm-hmm. So I have been involved in this space, and I'll give an example with when, for instance, I was at the bank running Standard Lesotho Bank. We were approached by the mobile network operators to open them trust account, to enable them to start the Mpesas, the eco-shows that you see today, and able to provide such, enabling them to a point that they have actually moved ahead in terms of providing the solutions that even include the easier payment of allowances to pensioners. So what was important was to say, in enabling them, what is our role and what is their role, so that each of the players play their part. Yeah.
The clarity of role. Let's now overlay this discussion with the regulatory aspect of it, because you spent some time with the Central Bank of Lesotho earlier on in your career. I want us to speak about the regulation of this financial services industry, but in a perspective where we say it, one, clarifies the role of each role player, but two, does regulation have a role in the nimbleness and evolution and innovation of the industry? So my point is to see these new solutions from fintechs, from mobile operators, all being under the regulation of central bank. Should central banks, not only locally but globally, have, I don't know, a department where they do R&D and keep up with the trends and see where we are going at convergence, where are the trends? Do you think our regulatory body has enough to respond to such disruptions and key trends?
Yeah, very, very, very good question. And I must first of all indicate that I have been blessed to have had opportunity to have worked at the central bank in the early 2000s, where one was able to get exposure and experience in the policy and regulation space, because it would later enable me to have a clearer understanding as a market player, whether in banking, asset management, or insurance, to appreciate that. And in simple terms, why do countries need regulators? And allow me to give an example of banking, where banks take people's money and lend to the public. Any bank at any point in time, in its balance sheet, 80 to 90% of what they have, its deposit liabilities, their capital ranges between 10 to 15%. So it tells you that the public is heavily invested in them as institutions. Therefore, regulators come in to say, what safeguards do we put in place to make sure that the public is not going to lose their deposits? I'm just making that simple example. So I've lived in an era where we used to have banks. You may not know that we used to have, for instance, what was called Agric Bank, which government owned, which unfortunately went under, and it was liquidated. So when it gets liquidated, it said government actually had to come in to close the gap because people needed their deposits that had been invested there. So that shows the significance of having a regulated environment, and to the credit of the government authorities and the central bank then, following the collapse of the likes of Agric Bank, a new Financial Institutions Act was promulgated in 1999, and it enabled the growth that we are seeing today. And they would later on move on to now revise the Insurance Act and Pension Administration Act, as I've said. So that's the one part in terms of the significance of regulation. And when we have an orderly setting, it enables certainty to investors to know that we know the rules of the game. This is what should happen. Having highlighted the importance of that, when you overregulate, you can also stifle innovation. So there has to be a balance in terms of what needs to be done to protect the public from being abused, but not overly do it in a manner that ultimately ends up now stifling innovation. And that's the part that you always find there's a consistent battle between regulators and financial sector players. At one point, I was the chairman of the Bankers Association. Locally, we dealt with these issues to actually say you should not be too restrictive as a central bank in dealing with these issues. There's a time when the countries of the region were talking issues of how do we harmonize the laws for the region. As you know, that Lesotho, we are part of SACU and CMA.
Yeah.
So in some instances, you actually find that we need the laws that actually enable cross-border transacting. And there was a time when I was actually chairing the SADC Banking Association, and we're driving now this convergence and harmonization discussions to say, as regulators look at them through their perspective, as banks, as market players, we should also now be providing insights to say, this is what will work from a private sector context or from a banking context. And this is what we are saying will not work from a financial sector context. So as you now devise this new laws, you should apply your minds to that. So that helped a great deal to get to where we are in terms of the innovations and the conversions that I'm talking to. The last part of your question relates to the role that, for instance, our regulator here, the central bank, does as it regulates most of the financial sector players. You find that in other markets, let me talk to our neighbor here, South Africa, they would have regulators that are focused on banking, that are others that are separate, focused on insurance, others on pension funds, others on fintechs and the likes. But you find that because of the size of our economy and where expertise was sitting, central bank ended up being now having to plug in some of these gaps and even being involved in some areas that you'd say ordinarily it ought not to be. But be that as it may, what we have always in our engagement with them advised is build capacity that is relevant for the sector. So that if you need deep expertise for pension fund administration, regulation, or for insurance, make sure that you have the right people there, not necessarily say you'll export people who are just doing banking supervision and regulation in there. So I think that has helped to say, despite the central bank's menu in our local context being much broader than what you get in other jurisdictions, at least they're working towards building those deeper insights that can enable them to regulate. And we will continue engaging where we can provide advice to allow innovation. Don't be too restrictive on these areas. Yes, we need to protect the public. Let's also make sure that there's financial stability and there's the proper rules of how things should be done. Yeah.
100% that. So we cannot overemphasize the critical role of overseeing the sector from regulators, because they stabilize things, they define roles, they protect the end clients. But at the end of the day, it's about that delicate balance. To try to, on the other side, build capacity to be relevant for or future fit for the evolution. Fascinating. Let's stick with banking, because you went from the Central Bank of Lesotho into Lesotho Post Bank.
Yeah.
Now, I want to ask you two questions that are related. Do you think in 2023 there is a commercial opportunity for another new bank in Lesotho? I'm asking you this because you have experience in the early years of Post Bank, how it started. You were a critical part, and you played an instrumental role in that. Looking back, do you think that there's a commercial opportunity that still exists now for a new bank? Because just across, we see some new players coming in. There were time banks in SA, zero banks now. They're trying to shape up the market. Do you think in our local context there's a space for a new bank?
I was asked that question when the Lesotho Post Bank project started, and the incumbent banks then felt that there was no need for another bank. And with what had just happened with the likes of the liquidation of Agri Bank, people were very much worried whether it was a good move to have another bank, particularly one that has a sole shareholder as the government of Lesotho. So I'll respond to your question by just highlighting to you the journey that we had to travel. It was quite a challenging project. When we started Post Bank, I'm one of the 3 founding directors who started there in 2004. That's when we actually came together and took the mandate that government was providing, worked to shape it to what it is today. And when we started, it was very important that we took heed some of the challenges that the country had experienced to avoid repeating those mistakes. And we were able to set it up in a manner that would make it to be a sustainable banking institution. Just to give context, when the Post Bank started, governments had just mandated that it just only deals with deposit taking and providing savings to the public. It was well known for Bugana Pulukelo. By then, as we were venturing into this project, one knew that that wouldn't be a sustainable model. So there had to be a transformation to say, what do banks do and how do banks generate their income? And we realized that it was very clear that we are not doing any credit extension to the public. We are not providing any transacting facilities. We are just collecting deposits. And it said the only way that Lesotho Post Bank was generating income was just through investing the deposit that it had. And it's not a sustainable model at all. So we actually had to get into the transformation journey that would allow it from just a savings deposit bank, given its licensing was restrictive, to a fully fledged bank. And I'm very proud that we were able to succeed in that journey, because we had to convince the shareholders themselves, convince the regulator, and put together a team that would move into that journey that allowed Lesotho Post Bank to play a critical role it is playing now. And it's amazing that from a retail banking space, it's actually the second largest bank that we have in the country. If you look back where we started around 2005, you'll realize that we laid a very good foundation for a very solid banking entity. Now, the question of whether there's still need for other banks, it will depend what the focus would be. And if the focus would be in areas that the current banks that are mostly in the commercial banking are not filling, then the answer is it can be done. We just need to be very clear and intentional about what is it that we want to solve for, and how do we focus. But this has to be done in a manner that we also understand the dynamics of our economy, what's the size of our economy, and will, if a new entity comes in, be sustainable. But the answer is it can be done.
Where do most of the bank's revenue come from? From personal retail banking or the corporate and investment banking aspect?
So the most of the lending is on the corporate space, commercial and corporate, with the large entities. And the transacting, you get more from the retail space with clients transacting. And there's still a lot more work that still needs to be done to make sure that there's more credit extension. Obviously, it's not just the bank's issues; it's also about preparing our society. I'm a proponent of role clarity and the strengths of institutions, so that institutions are allowed to do what they have to do. So in banking, people get into contracts where you lend to certain institutions using the depositors' money. So it says that money needs to come back. So someone, when he defaults or she defaults, it says there has to be recourse, and the legal system should be working effectively in a manner that it would allow that. And it is the same even in the insurance space. We get into contracts to manage people's risk, and when things are now not done according to book, we also now need the system to be there to provide that support. So it's quite complex. It's not just about the institutions themselves, but it is also about the ecosystem.
Okay. I think that leads us perfectly to my next question, which is now we moved to 2011 to 2019, somewhere there. You moved to a different banking brand, Standard Lesotho Bank. Someone asked me the other time and said, and I want to link this to one of your pointers earlier, that one of the critical roles banks play is to provide this credit, which wires this economic machine. Right. In the biggest banking brand locally, do you think banks have a role to play in terms of, forget about the personal and retail space, where I think the bigger impact would be is on deal structuring, deal advisory, on the corporate investment banking space. And I want to link this to America, because America, the prominence of Wall Street as one of the coveted careers back there, I think it's been dethroned by Silicon Valley now, technology. But back then, the career in banking used to be attractive. One, because of the financial rewards, but two, because of that role that corporate investment banking space used to play in terms of facilitating deals, being part of the, when you see a grain or TLBs or yellow plant, banking should be part of that in terms of putting that deal together, advising. Do you think as a banking sector broadly, locally, or even during your time at Standard Lesotho Bank, that part of the business unlocked its full potential?
Yeah, very, very, very good point. Let's start first with my decision to actually move from the Lesotho Post Bank to Standard Lesotho Bank. I was asked to join Standard Lesotho Bank, and what it offered was, I believe in learning and growing, and it offered an opportunity for one to say, I may have an exposure in terms of the regulation and supervision of the financial sector, the retail banking and the micro lending space that the Lesotho Post Bank was playing in. But I needed to also appreciate for instance, you are talking to the corporate and investing environment, and that's the broader menu that Standard Bank was offering. And what I learned was, indeed, the corporate and investment banking environment calls for different skill sets versus the retail banking environment. And the point that you're highlighting become very key in the corporate investment banking space. And I can assure you that the banks locally that are in the corporate investment banking are heavily invested in the economy. You look at the mining sector, you look at, for instance, the Vumbukani project, or in other areas, you'll find that there's a lot that they are doing. What has not been that prominent is the advisory piece, given our economy that, for instance, in SA or in the US, you're talking to the stock markets, where there would be a lot of activity around mergers and acquisitions, which is not what we have here. But I was having a conversation with one of the executives recently in the bank who was actually saying they're actually exploring what role from an advisory point of view actually they need to play as CIB operators. So there is that opportunity. It's just that the opportunities are not as huge as in a setting that has a well-structured capital market that allows mergers and acquisitions or changing of shares and ownership. Our environment is either entities that are government owned or that local or foreign investors have, that the shares that they have, they would hold too, instead of actually now having this active. And I know that the central bank is working on trying to get the securities exchange work, but it is early days because it actually calls for more work than what has been done. So the opportunity is there. It's just that it is not as big as it is in other areas. So in the other areas where clients are actually asking now these players with their CIB operations, they actually, I would say, playing that role effectively.
Okay, that's fascinating. Let's move forward. Fast forward to the now, where we are now. You are now heading LNIG Holland. I want us to spend some time speaking about, from a strategic perspective, what maybe just even remind the audience why there was a need to collaborate with Hollard, and what that partnership promises to bring in terms of synergies and levers, and just speak to us about what the clients of LNIG can expect from LNIG in 3, 5 years, 10 years. Let's speak around that.
Yeah. So I think from this conversation, you might have learned that I like transforming. Whether it's what we're starting up as with the Postbank project, or with the work that we had to do at Standard Lesotho Bank to make it the leading bank it is today, and having played those roles, I also felt that I need this exposure in the insurance space, and it was a very exciting opportunity for me to be asked to lead LNIG, and which in my view I said was the sleeping giant in the insurance sector. And I'll tell you why we looked at it as a sleeping giant that needed awakening, which is where our transformation journey is, where it is leading us to our bold next. LNIG in the short-term space, in the general insurance space, is actually has over 40 years experience. It was established in 1977 by the government of Lesotho, and as the longest saving short-term insurer, it says we have been involved in this environment, but very few people knew about LNIG as an entity. So the starting point had to be, how do we refresh our brand, and how do we get the people to know that the giant has awakened? And that's the whole essence of the journey we embarked on in terms of now transforming to us now as the LNIG Hollard, and with a very clear intentional vision to our bold next, so that we can play the role that as a company we're set up to do. So that's that in the main. Now getting to LNIG, where it's coming from, it's historically the government with the insurers from the UK, St. Paul, established LNIG, as I said, in the 70s, but over years, even when government embarked on the privatization, now some of the shareholding that government had was sold to Regent Insurance. So Regent Insurance had stakes, had shares in most insurers in the Southern African region. And later on, I think in the last 8 years or so, when it sold that stake, Hollard bought that stake. So our relationship with Hollard has not started with my just coming here 3 years ago. It actually predates that. It's just that we're silent about it. So our view when we undertook the brand survey to check our strength led us to actually say there's a very strong heritage that LNIG has. But what we should also not undermine is the innovations that Hollard is presenting to the market should be brought to bear. And when you now bring the two together, you build a very strong company that has a very strong heritage that people have allegiance to, but that also opens up the innovations that are required to make this company sustainable for the future. So that's where we're coming from with the LNIG Hollard brand. And you would see that we were all known for our white and blue colors in the LNIG world. We embraced now the purple and orange colors that Hollard is known for. And that is now what is bringing this brand that we call LNIG Holland, which I'm very excited about what we potentially are going to bring to the market. We've already started making inroads in our short-term insurance space. We have just launched a new product that we call All for Hair, and it's the only product that is actually targeted to a particular segment. And what we're trying to do is we're trying to learn more from our clients in terms of what they need, so that we can come up with solutions that are relevant to them. We've done a lot of work to actually now reposition our pension fund administration, and we now have a fully fledged employee benefits business that drives that. And there's a lot that will be coming up in the future. Earlier, I mentioned the critical role that pension funds play in the system. So there's a lot that we want to play going into the future. We also have a life assurance business that has a very good track record in terms of our savings and investments that we've provided to the market. We're now moving to the risk solutions that clients need. So there's a lot that when we talk of our vision of, we want to be not only the leading insurance provider, but also the favorite to our insurance. That's what we mean. So there are a lot of innovations that people say they see on TV in SA. They should watch the space. We are bringing them here.
Exciting. Maybe just double click on that. What this historical legacy and heritage of the LNIG brand in the local context, when you combine that with the innovation and the forward thinking of Holland. You've touched on the product side of it. You see these exciting products that you're developing. Do we have anything to look forward in terms of the service distribution channels? What do we have to look forward to on that aspect?
Yeah. Thanks very much for asking that question. It's very important. We're looking at this, I call it broader transformation, not only from one context. I've mentioned the brand piece, the product piece, but who delivers the services? It is people. So there's a people and cultural transformation that we've been working hard on over this last 3 years to actually repurpose our business. I always put forth to the team that when we have good employee engagements, fully engaged employees, it naturally leads to good client service. So for us to provide the service that our clients have told us, remember I said we started first by doing the brand survey, and some of the questions was, what kind of service are we providing? What more do you need? So those are the things that now influenced what we've structured in terms of our people and cultural transformation, to say these are the things that we need to do, and these are the improvements or the new innovations that we need to bring. So you'll see that there's a lot of excitement around the things that we do. Recently, the teams were celebrating Women's Day, and the gentlemen were in ladies' shoes to walk in their shoes. So those are part of the things that we try to bring excitement to the team, to actually say, when you solve for clients' problems, walk in their shoes, try to understand their issues, so that you do not only deal with the issues from your context. So there's a lot of work that you are doing. There's also another piece from a digital transformation. We have had COVID, people couldn't come to work in some instances, and the world realized all of a sudden the importance of having digital solutions to provide services to clients. So there's a lot of work in the digital transformation space that we are doing. We actually got a letter last week from the regulator. They were giving us a go-ahead on the call center that we've just launched on a pilot phase to actually see how providing services through a call center in this environment can be done. And once that becomes effective, we now scale it up in terms of now our strategies. We embracing the working closely with the mobile network operators. We have an insurance solution that solves for micro insurance challenges, where we have an EcoSure product that Econet sells, and we are actually the underwriters behind that. There's a lot of partnerships. We work with brokers and with banks. So those issues that we earlier spoke about convergence, are what we are now trying to say. How in our space, in terms of distribution channels and innovative channels that we need to bring to reach out easier to the clients, what are the things that we need to introduce to the market? So it's really exciting.
Fascinating. Yeah. Fascinating. Maybe a last question on insurance, because these leading organizations will come up with an outlook for the biggest insurance threats or spaces. Does LNIG or do you have a view on the Lesotho risk landscape in terms of the likelihood or impact of risk events that the insurance sector has to look out for 3-5 years out? What's your view on that?
Yeah. So we're very much alive to the realities of the environment that we operate in. But we do not only just look at our context in Lesotho, we also now say regionally what are the trends and globally what are the trends. And one of the key risk issues that the world is seeing is the impact of climate change. And in the insurance space, just to simplify things, it would mean you all of a sudden are having floods, they destroy the roads, they impact people's lives. Some of the properties we have insured, we get more potholes, we get more accidents in the cars, and that leads to more claims, more costs. Yeah. So it is something that we are alive to. And as LNIG Holland, we are applying our mind to say, what is our role in terms of working on the mitigants against climate change and the issues around the aspects that lead to better managing the world from a lens of the environment, social and governance, the ESG frameworks, are what we're already working on. Also, just to give context to the work that on and above what we're doing as LNIG Holland, that I do. Earlier this year, around March, as part of the team in Qatar, that was the least developed countries looking at the Sustainable Development Goals. And part of what I presented from the private sector context there was the work that as members of the International Organization for Employers, we are advocating for is the private sector should be given space to play their role, so that when these issues like on climate change started, it was as though it's just UN and government entities. But we are saying no. We should all come to the party, and each role player play their part. So that's what we positioned at that conference, and the outcomes coming out of that were shared at the UN in New York, and we keen to actually see everybody come to the party to solve for these issues, because we can't ignore those challenges. So I'm just highlighting how impactful the climate challenges are and how we are dealing with them, one from an entity point of view, but also broadly from a global context, what we are doing as members of the International Organization of Employers to actually advocate that all of us should be allowed the space to play, and we do our best to try to mitigate against those risks. Fascinating.
Yeah. Ndedemba, I want to squeeze in one last question on this chapter of corporate and professional career, but it's about a broader role that corporate governance has to play. You've served on, you've had a number of directorships from Stanley, Liberty, a lot more, right? And looking locally, I've seen a couple of headlines where our local indigenous businesses have went under or have run into some trouble. And if we unpack that, you most likely trace it to inefficient corporate governance. My question to you is, do you think effective and robust corporate governance is a competitive edge? It's not a tick a box exercise, but it's an actual value add that can sustain the growth of a business.
Yeah. Corporate governance is very, very, very key in making sure that companies do not just exist for a short period of time but are sustainable. Why is it that important? If you look at our context in Lesotho, you'll see that we have had a lot of successful businessmen and women whom, when they left this world, their businesses would collapse.
Exactly.
And that talks to exactly the purpose of corporate governance, to say they hadn't created structures that allow for these businesses not only to rely on themselves as individuals, but to be sustainable in their own right. In the corporate governance world, when we look at companies, we say directors breathe life to those companies. Now, when we fail to have proper corporate governance structures, it takes me to that aspect that I earlier spoke about of role clarity. We don't always separate what is the role of shareholders and what should they do in this level of the company. What is the role of the board and company directors? What is the role of the operating management? And when we just clump all these issues into one person, it naturally tells you that when unfortunately God calls this person, this business is not going to survive. But when we have clearly aligned the roles of what the shareholder is, what the board or the directors are, what the executives or staff that run the business roles are, you enable a succession planning and allowing the businesses to be sustainable. And I think we need to educate our emerging business people to apply their minds to that. Let me pick an example of well-known people. Bill Gates owns Microsoft. He used to run it. He isn't running it. And he acknowledges that the guys who are running Microsoft today are actually doing a much better job than he would do. Exactly. But our people tend to think that the only way for the business to run is I have to be at the center of everything. So I would advise that it is important that for the businesses to be sustainable, that we actually create space for robust corporate governance. And I must say, I was very happy with the work that the team did when the Mpho Code was introduced. I'd been involved in that in my days at the bank, even when I was here to facilitate that the team launches the Mpho Code. And my advice would be, if at least most companies would try at least to try to align themselves with that code, it could lead to better outcomes than what we're getting now. It would lead to businesses that do not go under when the founder leaves.
But where do you think that comes from? Does culture play a role in that? Because ineffective corporate governance, we've had many victims of it. It cannot be overemphasized, its importance. And I liked how you faced it. It's not, directors are not there to restrict and oversight. They're there to provide leadership and to bring fire and life into the company. Why do you think there's so much resistance to adopting good corporate governance practices locally?
Yeah, one is culture, and that's why it comes also to the issue that I've taken to say we have to transform, because it is not sustainable. And also, as a society, we have trust issues, there are trust deficits. People don't trust each other. And I think it talks to part of why having these conversations becomes important, so that we can begin to close the gap on the trust deficit and get the right people who are entrusted to do what they're supposed to do the right things. Because the trust deficit we get comes from some people who were given authority and abused it. And society is made up of what happens, and what may have not worked well in the political environment has influence in the business environment. So it is important that we actually self-correct on some of the wrongs that we have had in the past and say, what path do we chart going forward? Take the best of what we're doing right, but be intentional about leaving the bad that we did in the past, so that we can build a better future. So that's very critical. The third pillar is there are incentives for corporate governance here. In other environments, you find that because you have a big company that got registered in the exchange, there are certain incentives for you to comply with. And in our environment, we don't have much of that. So we actually need to deal with those issues to say, what kind of incentives do we create? What kind of issues do we deal with as a society to do away with trust deficit issues? Yeah.
Powerful. That's very profound. Let's end this discussion of business by asking you one of the general questions that we asked on this show. And the first one is, you travel across the world, you meet with entrepreneurs, investors. What, it could be something you're doing in your private time outside LNIG. What is that one thing that you feel so strongly about in terms of the potential for Lesotho? Put differently, I want you to give us your investment thesis of Lesotho. What one thing that you put all your life savings and pensions, because you have that strong and high conviction in it. You think, despite a lot of things not going our way as a country, you think there's great potential in that one thing.
Yeah. So let me, before I do that one thing, talk to what we should stop doing. We should stop being negative about our country, about ourselves. Lesotho offers a great investment case, and you hear this when you engage with potential investors. I mean, there was one investor when we were having discussions who was emphasizing the value that Lesotho brings in terms of its pure water, its pure environment, and what that in this world that is now polluted, if you look at the developed countries, what that offers to the country. And I think if everybody, I'm saying the society, we can stop being negative and begin to focus on the things that can make a difference and be positive about our country. That can change the narrative, because we are the ones who are actually doing bad by talking ill about our country. Personally, to respond to your question, I strongly believe in developing people, and I always make a very simple case. I'm a product of people who believed in me. I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing now if I didn't have people who believed in me. And there are many. We can take the whole day when I take you through the list of people who believed in me and enabled me to be able to do the work that I do now. So that's what I I'm investing my time on in terms of developing the potential that we have in this country. And the opportunities that I've had, for instance, when we had to start with the Lesotho Post Bank and bring Banawaso to get the project running, and even later on with the Standard Bank project, it's amazing that one of the transformations there that is not often spoken about is that bank was run by white males, and by the time I left, I developed the local talent of Banawaso, who are actually running that bank. And that's exactly where I'm investing my energy here as well, with the team here to actually try to say, you have great potential. Let's just focus on what matters. Let's have a clarity of purpose and vision, and let's put our work together. But know that for us to grow, we have to be humble enough to learn and not be arrogant to say we have this experience, but be humble enough to continue learning. So there's a book that I've actually shared with my team. It's about empowering and trust. Yeah, which is very exciting, and that's what I am personally investing my energy on. And once we can develop a society that is capable and competent, but most importantly has integrity, we can change the fortunes of our country.
Fascinating. So we usually ask this question to our guest, and the question is, what book are they reading, or what podcast or anything they're listening to? But because I'm in your space and I see a lot of books,
too many books.
I'm gonna flip the question. I'm gonna instead ask you, what one book you have read in the past would you say has had an impactful, an enormous and incredible impact on your journey? It could be on your corporate journey, it could be just as a human being. Tell us about that one book that you think the lessons you took away from still remain with you, and you go by with.
Yeah. It's called The Power of the Positive Mind. And why it was important is I read it when I was going through some very challenging time, professionally and personally. And starting the Post-Bank project was a very heavy lifting. And at a very tender age I was then, it wasn't easy. But I was able to invest in reading and learning, and I learned the significance of keeping a positive mind despite the odds. So that book was very important. But there's another one that is called Failing Forward. It taught me the significance of not running away from trying things, but try things, and if they work, scale them up. If they don't, drop them. So those books have been very, 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 very impactful. Yeah.
That's very powerful. I think that's the perfect note to end this discussion with. Have the positive mind and see its power, as well as in all things you are engaged in, you are participating, fail forward.
Yeah.
Mpho, thank you very much, Tati, for agreeing to speak to us.
My pleasure.
That brings us to the end of our episode. Thank you for watching. Cheers, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Cheers.